A Minneapolis man's last words.
I can breathe.
Reignites a conversation about race, police brutality, and social injustice.
Black Lives Matter.
George Floyd's life ended in 8 minutes and 46 seconds, pinned under the knee of a police officer. He's not the first African American whose death in police custody sparked protests.
Help me! Help me!
But it came during a health crisis, when more people are home watching and listening. And the call for change is so much more urgent right now.
We're not saying our lives are superior. We're saying that we should be treated equal.
Tonight, we're shining a light on race relations here in Florida.
From the Big Bend
and Tampa Bay, down the Gulf Coast,
and across South Florida.
A statewide look at the younger generation now leading the movement for racial justice.
It was just exciting to see them take over where we had stopped and then to keep on going.
The race to register minority voters for an election that could open the doors to real change.
And I think Blacks, particularly in this next election, have an opportunity to really move the needle on the issues that we've been trying to address for hundreds of years.
Barriers that Black men and women continue to face in their everyday lives.
I've been in meetings and conferences, small conferences, where it's not many people that look like me. And that's unfortunate.
And kids having very grown-up conversations with their parents.
I'm a kid that loves to give back to his community. I'm not some thug off of the street, and I'm just a kid that wants to improve his life and live better.
In the midst of uncomfortable conversations, there's a lot of anger, frustration, and yes, hope. Hope for healing, hope for change. Hope that our state can rise above.
Good evening. I'm Holly Davis with WPTV News Channel 5 in West Palm Beach. This is Race Relations, shining a light across Florida. For the next hour, we're uniting voices from each of our Scripps markets in the state.
I'm Shari Armstrong with WFTX Fox 4 in Cape Coral. 2 short months ago, George Floyd's name became known around the world, and his death represents today's desperate call for justice and change.
In Tallahassee at WTXL ABC 27, I'm Ava Van Valen. We have been watching the movement in each of our communities, the sadness, anger, and frustration that many of you have felt, and it's all happening during a trying time in this country.
The coronavirus pandemic, an economic crisis, and the uncertainty of what is to come. I'm Dia Riley from ABC Action News in Tampa. Tonight, we're coming together to shine a light on race relations in Florida. The movement, the divide, and the action being taken to make our state a place for all people.
Black Lives Matter! Black Lives Matter!
Black Lives Matter, 3 words that now represent a global movement for racial justice. But here in Florida, those on the front lines of the fight for racial equality and equity say the term Black Lives Matter is more than one movement. Sabira Rayford has their story.
It's a message that spans decades. Now, civil rights leaders of our past are passing the torch to a new generation.
This monument is the story of the change that we want to come.
87 years old.
But our success depends upon the movement.
Edith Bush won't stop walking towards justice.
Black Lives Matter.
Why are you still so passionate at 80-something years old?
Well, it is because I see the young people out there fighting for the same thing that we fought for over 20 years ago.
In the early spring of 1964, local Negroes began civil rights demonstrations with white and Negro sympathizers from the North participating.
Edith was on the front lines in Florida fighting for racial equality.
Our organization won recognition from the state of Florida for our work in the civil rights movement.
From John Lewis to Al Sharpton or Martin Luther King Jr. III, Edith's West Palm Beach home documents her dedication.
So when people walk in this door, I want them to see what we've been through.
52 years later, a new movement is mirroring the past.
It was just exciting to see them take over where we had stopped and then to keep on going.
19 years old.
Yeah.
How do you find people react to you?
Some people say I'm too young to know what I'm talking about. But I mean, when you see it, it's on social media. America watched George Floyd die for 8 minutes and 46 seconds.
Widmeyer Pierre is the co-founder of the Reformers Movement.
We educate people on why it's important to vote and try to build the bridge between police departments and communities.
His group has organized dozens of Black Lives Matter protests throughout South Florida.
We're not saying our lives are superior. We're saying that we should be treated equal.
Police! No peace!
People have been protesting mistreatment of Black people and saying in so many words that Black Lives Matter for years.
Executive Director of the Spady Cultural Heritage Museum in Delray Beach, Charlene Farrington, says similar to the murder of Emmett Till in the 50s, the killing of George Floyd reignited the push for racial justice.
The old African saying, an injury to one is an injury to all. I think what's happening is young people are starting to understand that, and so they are leaving the small issues aside and now starting to advocate for the larger issues, which is why our civil rights movements that are going on today are starting now to look like they used to look in the 50s and 60s.
I'm proud.
At the Box Art Gallery in Palm Beach County, Widmeyer is happy these pictures paint one difference.
Everybody coming together in unity, Black, white, Hispanic, Republican, Democrat. We've had Republicans march with us. So it's like party aside, people first. That's what it's about.
For these activists, Black Lives Matter is a movement that transcends decades.
Love can overcome hate. Light can overcome darkness. Yeah. And judge a person not by the color of the skin, but the content of their character. Come on.
Reporting in South Florida, I'm Sabir Rayford.
Salt and pepper, peanut butter and jelly, beaches and sand. These are all things that our minds link together without us even thinking about it. As Brian Jackson reports, that's also how we form implicit biases, whether we want them or not.
Living in society, having a brain. That's it. If you live in society and have a brain, you're going to have implicit bias. Today you will be challenged, okay, but in a good, loving way.
Dr. Bryant T. Marks is a professor at Morehouse College and the founding director of the National Institute on Race and Equity.
In its essence, implicit bias is a stereotype that is an association of a group with a trait that can affect how we think, feel, and behave at a subconscious level. But at the end of the day, as we live life, we're overexposed to certain groups and certain traits and certain groups in certain roles. And upon repeated exposure, our mind locks in that association automatically. And once that happens, the seed for implicit bias is planted.
You've worked with thousands of law enforcement officers over the course of your career. How would you say that implicit biases kind of impact their ability to protect and serve?
Most officers, in our experience, want to be fair. They want to be impartial. We all have biases just by being human, right? It's by living in society and having a brain. Some of us go into journalism. Some of us go into being bus drivers, and some go into policing. Before any of those occupations occurred, the common factor was their humanity. So just being human in this society allowed us to form certain biases. If I go into policing, my bias is expressed in a particular way. The thing that's so sensitive about policing is they have the right to take somebody's life if they deem it necessary. So when their bias plays out, somebody can die. If an accountant bias plays out, a number may be off. A bus driver, somebody might get left at the stop, but nobody's dead. So for police officers, even though they're human like everybody else, they chose a profession that is special, unlike everybody else's.
Black Lives Matter is painted on city streets all over the country. Those symbolic acts have led to conversations that maybe weren't being held before. However, listen to the responses Dr. Marks gets when he's training a group and poses the question, what comes to mind when Americans think of African American males?
Dangerous, thug, criminal, rapper, athlete. Those are our top 5 across the country. Not only police, everybody. Teachers, doctors, nurses, and black males themselves. Everybody gets those answers.
We all we got, we all we need.
Imagine walking through life with these words as your personal brand. You walk into the office building for the interview, this walks in with you. You walk down the street past a police officer, this walks with you.
No matter your race or gender, there's one easy way to find out what role implicit bias plays in your life.
Talk to somebody who knows you really, really well, a loved one. I'm going to give you a pass for you to tell me what biases you think I have. And then you listen. Here's the deal. Sometimes other people will see our biases before we do.
Dr. Mark suggests putting your bias to the test with this. The results, he says, could surprise you.
Work is not to figure out, do you have any implicit bias? You're human, you do. Just be grown and accept it, okay? Your work is to figure out which specific biases you have, what is the magnitude, and how they systematically advantaging and disadvantaging anybody else. I can have a bias to a particular group, right? But if I'm at work, I have a certain way that I hire people, promote people, evaluate them that's objective and standardized. So I still have my biases, but my practice is such that my biases do not affect outcomes. That's the work you want to do.
In Tallahassee, I'm Brian Jackson.
Still to come, racial injustice within Florida's prison system, how lawmakers on both sides of the aisle are working to correct the disparities, and a deeper look into the racial divide in our communities, as well as our police departments. Two police chiefs explain why not enough has changed in recent years.
Racial disparity continues to plague Florida's prison system. In fact, it's gotten worse. We looked at the data and found Black inmates outnumber every other race despite being a minority group in the state. The divide only widening in recent years, but those working to restore balance tell State Capitol reporter Forrest Saunders this may be the year to make it happen.
His time behind bars was a learning opportunity.
It was an experience that has really been, I would say it was my own educational journey.
The lessons guiding former felon Greg James, now a Tallahassee pastor and advocate for inmate voting rights.
Prison institution as a whole, it was a higher learning facility for me.
It also taught him that the prison system has a great deal of racial injustice.
If by chance we try to deny it, then we're walking in a state of total darkness, but you can blatantly see the fight that we're in.
You've probably seen the national stats before. Blacks make up about 14% of the U.S. population, but about 33% of those incarcerated. Did you know in Florida, the disparity is wider? The latest state corrections data showing about 47% of Florida's inmates are Black, despite making up only 17% of our population. Blacks even surpassing the 40% of white inmates, though Florida is predominantly white.
Unfortunately, that's the way it has been for many years.
State Representative Diane Hart says she's been working for years to tackle the problem with help of lawmakers on both sides of the aisle. A key is amending Florida's sentencing laws.
It is a known fact that Black and brown people get far larger, longer sentences than anyone else. And that's why you see the huge disparity.
And add to that, research showing Black offenders are more likely to get arrested in the first place. Just last year, Florida state criminologists reported finding the odds of prosecution were on average 3% greater for Black offenders compared to white offenders, despite having worked together to commit a crime.
It's the same offense, it's the same victims happening at the same time in the same place. Right, so none of those things can be used to explain any difference that you find.
Hart has pushed several laws she hopes will correct the disparities. One of them from last session would have cut the length of time nonviolent offenders need to serve from 85 to 65% of their sentence. Tough on crime Republicans stopped the bill, siding with law enforcement worried early release was too dangerous.
I don't see how putting more of these repeat offenders back in our communities before they're reformed is going to make our communities safer.
Undeterred, Hart says she'll try again next year, hopeful the climate has changed. Protests and rallies still filling streets across the nation, she says, are hard to ignore.
Nobody can ignore it. I mean, it's been put in our face, and we have to deal with many of these issues.
Joining her, James. While he'll be fighting for the restoration of ex-felon voting rights, he says it all harkens back to the same goal, removing racial injustice from the prison system.
Even though we are the majority inside of the prison system, and even though we are the minority that's being released, there's so much value in us.
At the Capitol, I'm Forrest Saunders.
Tonight, our Florida investigative reporter takes a look at the racial diversity within law enforcement agencies around our state. And what Katie LaGrone found is, despite years of talking about change, Black officers remain a minority on the streets. Tonight, she speaks to two police chiefs who have faced their own color barriers to learn why.
In the predominantly white and male world of law enforcement, years of battling for change is slowly starting to shift as leadership in law enforcement finally brings some color to the table.
They are two police chiefs.
Law enforcement has always been a white male dominant profession.
Who represent two sides of Florida.
We're not hiring minority officers just so they can work in a minority community.
But both share the same skin color.
I've been in meetings and conferences, small conferences where it's not many people that look like me. And that's unfortunate.
And the same battle because of it.
When I'm wearing this uniform, they see me as one person. And when I take this uniform off, they see me as another person.
St. Petersburg Police Chief Anthony Holloway and Delray Beach Police Chief Javaro Sims are among Florida's black police chiefs. In a state where 17% of its citizens are black, we found less than 10% of law enforcement officers patrolling the streets here are black, according to the latest demographic data kept by the Florida Department of Law Enforcement.
We do want to try to mirror our community, but again, it's trying to find those qualified candidates.
In St. Petersburg in the 1960s, a dozen black officers, known as the Courageous 12, sued the city over unequal treatment and ultimately won. Today, with a city population that's 22% black, 15% of its police officers are black. But in Delray Beach, a smaller city, 31% of its population is black, yet just 13% of officers are black, according to the latest state data.
Does that work for you?
No, it doesn't work for me.
We looked at a dozen Florida law enforcement departments with at least 100 white officers and found around the state the percentage of black officers can be 2 or 3 times lower than the percentage of black citizens they serve. These chiefs explain why.
The way things that are going on right now, it's hard to find an African-American officer who wants to be a police officer.
I think a lot of African Americans specifically shy away from law enforcement because of the stigma between law enforcement and the African American community or the minority community in general. So you have to find a way to break down some of those barriers.
Which for them means recruiting as early as high school, at black colleges, job fairs, ads in minority magazines, and attending community events in minority neighborhoods. Chief Sims says since he became chief last year, more than 70% of his new officer hires are minorities, 9 black.
Yes, definitely a personal goal.
A goal both recognize will be a challenge to reach, as long as incidents including Michael Brown and George Floyd continue to happen.
That African-American or that minority we hire, he or she really has to have thick skin.
I'm Katie LaGrone reporting.
It's a hard talk, a sad talk.
He's driving now. We talk about, literally rehearse what to do if he's ever pulled over.
And it's been happening for generations. How black parents are helping their children express their feelings and thoughts during this time of unrest.
A generation of black children have been raised on videos of violence against those who look like them committed by police. Many parents now struggling with how to help them make sense of these traumatic images. Angela Green spoke with 2 moms who say now more than ever, it takes a village to help their young sons understand what they're seeing and how to cope with their emotions.
I tell them every day that I'm very, very proud of you. I know you're going to do great things.
17-year-old Cameron is his mother's pride and joy. At first glance, many people think he's an adult.
I don't see it myself. I don't think I look that old.
Because he looks big and abrasive, they just see the threat.
Karen Miller remembers one of her most difficult conversations with Cam about race and being a black boy.
When I saw and read the descriptions of Tamir Rice, before I even saw a picture of him, he was described by the police as being, he looked like a man, and it just took me right to Cam.
That was 6 years ago. At the time, Cam was about the same age as Tamir Rice, who was only 12 years old when he was shot and killed by police in Cleveland, Ohio. The officers were responding to a call about a man with a gun. Rice was at a playground, throwing snowballs and playing with a toy pellet gun. It was all captured on video. For Elena Newbold, those conversations started when her son was in the 4th grade.
In 4th grade, in elementary school, there's a little bit of discrimination. And in that moment, I was like, okay, I have to start talking to him about race because he went to a primarily white school. So I had to start speaking to him about race and how people may not treat you right, but that doesn't mean that you get out of character.
Now 13-year-old Gabe is in junior high school. His mom describes him as very outspoken.
I'm a kid that loves to give back to his community. I'm not some thug off of the street, and I'm just a kid that wants to improve his life and live better.
I actually encourage him to be vocal. Stand up for yourself, advocate for yourself is what I teach my kids. My fear is that people aren't going to understand his advocacy. People aren't going to understand how passionate he is about the things that he holds true or the things that he believes in. And as a result, he's going to be looked at as the angry person or the person that always has something to say.
Both Karen and Elena's parenting skills have shifted with each incident.
We have to be very real when we're talking to our kids and not sugarcoat what's going on. I try and be as honest as possible with my kids because if I'm not honest with them and they go out into this world, you know, I'm leaving them open to a number of things, a number of attacks or a number of failures that they can possibly be faced with because I wasn't honest with them home behind closed doors. He's driving now. We talk about, literally rehearse what to do if he's ever pulled over.
I don't mind the cleanliness, but she can be a little rowdy. Being the only child, I'm all she got.
Cam and Gabe are part of the Omega Lamplighters Youth Leadership Organization. Royal King founded the mentoring program back in 2008 through his fraternity, Omega Psi Phi. King says mentoring programs like his are needed now more than ever.
It was just a reminder, a grim one, of the big task we have in mentoring our kids, but it's also a calling of pride.
King says their meetings and conversations have helped the kids express their feelings during a time of unrest.
We understand that as black men, we're sometimes taught to bury it, to not express your emotions and to not let people see you vulnerable or hurting from some stuff. And we do the opposite with them.
With the Lamplighters, like, it's more than one person like putting in their input, telling their story about what happened when they were younger.
Usually through the calls with the Lamplighters, we were able to express ourselves in a private environment where we can trust everybody around us, trust them, hear them out, and talk to them about it.
But as King explains, the mentors have had to change their approach to helping the boys understand what they're seeing play out all across the country.
We've really been taking a stronger approach of bringing in more people who don't look like them to not only help our kids so that they're not only comfortable with us, but teaching them how they can be comfortable and still themselves with other people and other men who don't look like them.
And while those conversations continue to help guide these ambitious young men, King and these two parents encourage other adults, no matter what your race is, to get involved in communities outside of your own.
Find out why some of the issues are happening in some of these lower income communities that are minority populated, and figure out how you could help be a part of the solution.
On the other side of fear is greatness. So step out of that fear and step into greatness. You never know the impact that you can have or that your story, your upbringing can have on the life of a child that's, you know, looking at you.
In Tallahassee, I'm Angela Green.
With the pandemic, King tells us they've had to shift to online video meetings and phone calls to connect with the boys. He adds one of the biggest obstacles his organization faces is finding men willing to become mentors. If you are interested in volunteering with the Omega Lamplighters, or if your son is interested in joining, there are 25 chapters across the country.
In our next half hour, turning tides in 2020. The African American vote holds a lot of weight this year. The push to empower minority voters this election cycle. We've watched it happen across the country. Confederate monuments removed. The history of those symbols in Florida's past and present.
2020 might feel lost, but it isn't. Despite millions of Americans infected with COVID-19 and tens of thousands dead, your vote in the 2020 election can have impact. Here's Michael Paluska with the push to register as many voters as possible, including Black voters, the poor, minorities, and people who feel disenfranchised.
Many Floridians tell us they already feel disenfranchised, especially blacks and minority groups. And with the pandemic and everyone feeling unsure about the future, a lot of groups are pushing people to get out, register to vote, and change their lives in the November election.
The fires of frustration and discord are burning in every city, north and south.
Well, if you can't be the sun, be a star. For it isn't by size that you win or you fail. Be the best of whatever you are.
What's our excuse today for not voting? How do we so casually discard the right for which so many fought?
Then and now, America is still at a crossroads.
No justice, no peace!
Civil unrest, record unemployment, a pandemic. If there was a better time to feel in control of something, anything, the time is now. Your vote, your choice.
We have to put our votes and our voice behind the people we truly believe in
person and through virtual video.
Stakes are high here in Florida.
We listened to multiple voices asking what they are fighting for.
Florida has a long history of putting unnecessary barriers in front of the ballot box, and that is only going to be compounded by COVID.
And I think blacks, particularly in this next election, have an opportunity to really move the needle on the issues that we've been trying to address for hundreds of years.
One of the things we can also implement too is same-day voter registration in Florida. That is a big one.
They continue to hold the power. They continue to tell us what is best for us.
Yvette Lewis, the president of the Hillsborough branch for the NAACP, says voter disenfranchisement is happening in real time. Her office slammed with calls.
Deemed that was unconstitutional, and now we're
I knew I should have put that phone on vibrate.
Go ahead.
Oh, gosh. Oh, my gosh. I knew it. I cannot. The phones won't stop. I'm sorry. Oh, my God. This is...
So is that someone calling in?
Pretty much. And they are wanting their rights to vote.
Most of those calls are about felony disenfranchisement. In 2018, Floridians voted to restore felon voting rights to an estimated 1.6 million people. 20% are African American, and many still can't register.
Tell me what these people would really do by voting. What are you afraid of, state of Florida? What are you afraid of?
Governor Ron DeSantis challenging the law in court, arguing that all court-related fines and fees be paid before voting rights are restored. For those felons, Florida's August 18th primary is lost. A hearing in appeals court in August is past the voter registration deadline.
Enough is enough. You know, at some point, the state of Florida has got to relinquish some of the power back to the people.
Black women are the most dependable voters.
Jordan Pride is the president of the Hillsborough County Democratic Black Caucus. She says during the 2018 governor's race, blacks and minorities showed up because they were passionate about Andrew Gillum. DeSantis eked out the victory. 32,463 votes kept Gillum from making history, becoming the first black governor in the state of Florida.
I sincerely regret that I couldn't bring it home for you.
One of the demographics that we're targeting as a caucus is young black males. We really do feel will make the difference in this upcoming election.
Because of the coronavirus, Pride says voter registration drives are going a mix of old school phone banks and mailers and social media blitzes, doing everything they can to register and educate black voters.
Historically, African Americans typically don't vote by mail. They have an issue with trusting the system, to be quite frank.
And my hope is that Floridians say, no more. We want free, fair, and accessible elections.
Mirna Perez, the director of the Brennan Center's Voting Rights and Elections program, says the COVID disruption for voters could be extreme. Voting machine issues, long lines plague Georgia's primary. Perez says more staff, polling locations, sanitization, and the ability to handle increased mail-in ballots are needed to protect voters. That's why they're petitioning Congress for an additional $4 billion.
Would you like a little more money this year?
We can always use more money to have great elections.
We were there as Hillsborough County sent out nearly 290,000 mail-in ballots, the most ever. Supervisor of Elections Craig Latimer preparing for COVID with plexiglass and pens. The county also urging people to vote by mail.
Vote by mail is actually the first votes that we release on election night. Vote by mail and early vote. We begin processing these. Every single one of them that's accepted is going to be counted and tabulated. There shouldn't be any worry about it at all.
Lewis looks forward to the day when the past doesn't repeat itself. Americans of all races and genders are equal, and her phone calls filled with so much pain are silent.
And I hope I see it before God takes me on. This organization has been around for well over 100 years. Some of the people that's in power should say, why is this organization still around? We're here because of systemic racism, social injustice, because people's civil rights continue to be violated every day.
In Tampa, I'm Michael Paluska.
Just last week, voting rights groups and the state reached a settlement in a legal battle over Florida's vote-by-mail procedures. Civil rights and voting advocates announced the state agreed to revise its voting process to allow minorities, disabled, and low-income Floridians better access to casting their ballots amid the pandemic. That includes expanding the vote-by-mail deadline and requiring the state to educate all 67 election supervisors on vote-by-mail options, early voting, and voting registration. The groups also say they will continue to fight for disenfranchised voters to ensure their votes are counted and also enforce the settlement if needed.
Since the death of George Floyd, the Southern Poverty Law Center says 40 Confederate monuments have either been removed, relocated, or renamed in this country. John Shainman takes a look at Florida's monuments and symbols that are now back in the spotlight.
From a cemetery hilltop in Fort Pierce, you can find a handful of Confederate flags at the grave sites of those who fought for the Confederacy. They sit undisturbed. But in Fort Myers, a Robert E. Lee bust was vandalized. In Baker County, lawyers are demanding a courthouse mural with 3 hooded Klansmen be removed. And in St. Augustine, the Civil War sparks fierce debate.
If we destroy that history, it's going to be replaced with violence and anger because people are going to forget where they came from.
The city of St. Augustine recently voted to relocate the state's oldest Civil War monument. Descendants of those represented on the obelisk suing the city, saying it cannot be safely moved. Here in the Palm Beaches and Florida's Treasure Coast, there aren't the Confederate memorials that you see in other parts of the state. However, there is a symbol that flies above that also has at times been the source of controversy.
We are the first flag in North America.
Dr. James Clark, an author and history professor at the University of Central Florida, says back in the early 1500s, the Spanish flag was first raised over one of her territories. It had a simple red cross on it. Back in the Union after the Civil War, later versions of the state flag included the phrase, "Let us alone," and a simple white flag with the state seal. Then in 1900, voters decided to add the red X.
Some people believe that the big X is borrowed from the Confederate flag, which of course Florida was a part of. Others believe it comes from our Spanish heritage of 300 years.
So you don't see any controversy with the flag, and it wasn't designed to create controversy.
The motivating factor, I believe, was not to honor the Confederacy, but to make it look like not a flag of surrender.
While Mississippi just voted for a new state flag, Clark doesn't see the appetite for it here, even though a rewrite of the state's constitution in the 1960s allows for it.
And now the legislature can change it. They can do anything they want to it. It's up to the legislature if they want to change the flag of Florida.
Do you miss the legislature at all? Former state representative Larry Lee said growing up, he didn't think about the flag's imagery.
Until I went to Tallahassee, I never paid much attention to the cross.
Lee said there was very little discussion during his time in office about the flag. What did gain his attention was an effort not to remove monuments of the past, but to add one.
We will see a slavery memorial on the grounds of the Capitol.
Approved in 2018, Lee's last year in Tallahassee, $400,000 in funding was approved toward the construction of the slavery memorial this past session.
We felt it was only the right thing to do that. We recognize those people that helped build this state, build that Capitol, and recognize them.
As for his take on the renewed attention to Florida's sometimes checkered past,
pray for the day that we will truly live up to the true meaning of our Constitution, and that is we are one nation under God.
I'm John Shainman.
A fair shot at the American dream.
It's kind of like when you're trying to date someone who rejects you. Do you go back again when you know what they said the first time is what they meant?
But we found Florida's black business owners are having trouble getting the help they need. And two people who are inspiring the need for change within a system.
Bankers and lenders are the gatekeepers for wealth and a shot at the American dream. But as Jasmine Stiles found, some black business owners are having trouble gaining access.
People question our sanity when we say we're going to open up a restaurant in this area.
Life is a numbers game for Elihu and Carolyn Brayboy. Married for 41 years, business partners for a little more than 7, born and bred in the Deuces, one successful restaurant, and 0 loans.
We applied for a $5,000 line of credit with Bank of America in 2014, and they denied the application.
But even without the help, Chief's Creole Cafe became a success. But like other restaurants, was hit hard by the pandemic.
We find that obtaining financing is very difficult.
But they decided to try again in June. The couple spent hours filling out the application for the federal Paycheck Protection Program loan.
Less than 10 minutes, they sent us a response. Ineligible.
You had to be both a depositor and have a loan. And we did not have a loan.
A recent study shows federal small business loans to black businesses was on the rise between 2006 and 2008. But then, during the Great Recession, dropped from 8 to 3%.
We know we have an unfair financial marketplace. We know that lending discrimination still exists. We know that access to credit is not equal.
Ashley Harrington works with the Center for Responsible Lending, a nonprofit aimed at leveling the financial playing field. We saw the stories of major companies like Shake Shack and Kanye West's Yeezy line getting millions in paycheck protection loans. Harrington believes the money banks get to facilitate those big loans makes lending to small businesses less favorable.
That also limited the incentives of banks to work with the really small businesses, the businesses owned by people of color, because they're making a lot less money to do the same amount of work.
After calls for transparency, the U.S. Small Business Administration recently put out the list on who was receiving paycheck protection loans. We looked at the breakdown on race and found hundreds of thousands of Florida businesses receiving these loans categorized as unanswered.
It was never a goal of theirs to actually collect, track, and release this data.
Harrington says the biggest obstacle black businesses face is going through a lender. A recent Federal Reserve report found 27% of black-owned businesses did not even apply for loans because they feared they'd be turned down.
It's kind of like when you're trying to date someone who rejects you. Do you go back again when you know what they said the first time is what they meant?
The Brayboys say race has definitely been a factor as of late, but in a good way. When word spread about them getting denied the paycheck protection loan, Elihu says the Black Lives Matter movement and the heightened awareness to support black businesses got an ally to step up.
A restaurateur in Tampa called us up and asked us what could he do to help.
He really connected us with a smaller bank. We did the same 3-hour application, the prep work for it, applied and was approved.
The difference was the attitude of the bank.
In the end, it worked out, and Chief's Creole Cafe was given a fighting chance. But Elihu says the financial marketplace needs to be more accessible to everyone.
There's no way you can do the growth of equality and equity without access to capital.
In St. Petersburg, I'm Jasmine Stiles.
As we look at what change could look like in our country, we'd also like to acknowledge the many people already hard at work. People like Gwynetta Gittins, an educator who says she witnessed and was a victim of unfair treatment as a local teacher. She says she knew the only way to change that was to climb the ranks. So she did, and she made history along the way.
Gwynetta Gittins, a businesswoman turned teacher for over 13 years, says what came next wasn't exactly part of the plan.
Politics? Are you serious? Oh, no.
Oh, yes. Turns out her love for education only prepared her for a bigger role.
Thought about the days that I sat in the classroom and never thinking I would be up there.
Up there.
Welcome, everyone.
making history in 2018 as the first Black Lee County School Board member and serving as board chair during her first year. Gittins says her time with students helped her to understand why representation beyond the classroom matters.
Can you imagine being a little brown or Black child and you never see anyone in authority that looks like you? What does that say?
In her current position, Gittins is bridging gaps of communication between the district and the families it serves. Her service to the community in this position, historic. And as the district's only Black school board member during a national fight against racial injustice, the wife and mom admits it's tough.
You know, I'm trying to be Black enough and not white and not too far this way and that way. It's exhausting being me.
Exhausted, but motivated. Gittins says the events following the death of George Floyd inspired her, challenging her to share her own experiences.
If I go through these 4 years and I don't say anything, I'm just as wrong as the people that are doing these things.
She says the change needed in our country is similar to the change she hopes to bring to the district. A willingness to have an open mind
and to really listen and hear what people are saying.
Until then, she says she's proud that students in Lee County won't have to wonder what it's like to see an African American on the school board.
It gives hope, I think.
Gwinnetta Gittins inspires hope in so many, identifying a need for change within a system and climbing the ranks to do just that. And did you catch how she said she would never go into politics? It's actually very similar to Dave Thomas's story. He tells us his experiences with law enforcement as a young boy left a bad impression. So as Lisa Greenberg shows us, his career choice is quite surprising.
Dr. David Thomas says he watched the video of George Floyd's deadly encounter with a group of Minneapolis police officers 3 times.
First, I took it for the initial, okay, what's happened here? Then I watched it the second time to try to understand. And then the third time, I really kind of get into tactics.
Seeing a video like this,
it scares the hell out of me. I have a grandson in Michigan. I have a son in Texas. And I have a son here in Gainesville.
He says his dad had to talk to him at a young age about how to interact with police.
The first time I had a gun drawn on me by a police officer, I walked up to his car and literally asked him, how fast does this car go? I'm 10. I can remember it like it was yesterday. And he took a .357 Magnum and stuck it in my face and told me to get the hell away from his car. That's a true story. In middle school, they would stop us. Detroit Police Department would stop us. They would drag us in the alley and beat us up.
As a teen, he says he had some strong words about law enforcement.
I hated police with a passion.
So it might surprise you, Dr. Thomas grew up to be a police officer.
What changed me is when I was getting my bachelor's degree, the Detroit Police Department was sending officers to my college to get their degrees. I became friends with a bunch of officers, and I got to know them. When I say friends, I mean like going over their house and help them do the yard and help them fix up their houses, that kind of thing. And that changed my whole perception of because I got to see the human side of these guys, and they were normal people.
He says when he was done with school, the only job he could find was in law enforcement.
My dad, when I told him I was going to become a police officer, I can't repeat exactly what he said, but he said that I was useless. And he couldn't understand after all these years, and I went and got a degree, that I would end up being a police officer.
This photo is from when he graduated from the police academy. Because of what he went through growing up, he says he understands what people protesting feel, but also says the actions of Derek Chauvin don't represent them all.
I think even the police recognize that this has gone too far afield. There really has to be an attitude change.
From Fort Myers, I'm Lisa Greenberg.
And Thomas does say there needs to be change to police departments to stop incidents like Floyd's death from happening. He says these departments need to clean out these, quote, bad cops, and it's up to the police chiefs to do just that. He also says chiefs need to have closer relationships with the people that they serve.
I have a dream. My 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character.
Nearly 57 years ago, Martin Luther King Jr. delivered his I Have a Dream speech on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial, calling for civil and economic rights and an end to racism in this country. More than 250,000 of his supporters joined him then on August 28, 1963.
The fight for equality and change continues to this day. Black men and women are still facing systemic obstacles, but through a new generation of activists and the very real and raw conversations people are having across our country, there is hope for progress.
At Scripps, we're committed to you and the communities we serve. As our company motto says, give light and the people will find their own way. We know today's unrest cannot be solved in an hour, but you must always start somewhere for real change to happen.
And 2020 could be that pivotal turning point for concrete solutions. There's hope that one day Martin Luther King Jr.'s dream really will come true. We thank you for joining us. Stay safe, stay well. Good night.
They're speaking from their experiences, speaking from their pain.
I'm talking for every mother who has lost a son, not mine.
I feel encouraged that it wasn't just black, it wasn't just brown, it wasn't just white. We all came together.
I think that if we can continue to show others that we can come together like this for peace in a peaceful state, then I think that we can cause great change.